worried about heroin? Well, if we did not have heroin, what would it be? We're coming out with the designer drugs now. And that will be the next epidemic. There will always be an epidemic. The question is how big? When you have no hope, how do you anesthetize yourself? Well, we are a pill nation. We want a pill for everything. We want a pill for sex. We want a pill to feel good. We want a pill to lose weight. We want a pill to make us look better or our skin darker. Any of these things. The other day, I walked through and I was watching, we had interns in, I was watching them, they were counting pills. We have a pill counter because we have to collect all the pills at the scene, right? This was an elderly lady. She was prescribed 33 pills to take every day. 33 pills. The prescribing of opioids, commercial opioids, in this country is insane. It is absolutely insane. And doctor shoppers are everywhere, and then there's also doctors that are willing to sell it. The control of it has not been consistent. And there are missing opioids from the drug company to the pharmacy. Robberies, pilfering, that type of thing. It is very easy, but expensive, to give OxyContin on the street, oxycodone, those things. But we live in a society where mom and dad, if there is a mom and dad in the house, and that's now 50% of the time not true, but mom and dad have a medicine cabinet. Now, people are running around talking about locking up guns, but the far more dangerous thing is a medicine cabinet. Because you got kids that are 12, 13, 14 years old now that are going in and getting all kinds of commercial opioids and antidepressants, benzodiazepines, all these psychotropic drugs, and using them because mom and dad use them. Everybody uses them. The TV says they're all good. You'll have maybe occasional anal leakage and you'll see Satan, but other than that, everybody in the ad is smiling, right? And so there we are, and we have the advertisement that pharmaceuticals will take care of everything. They'll take care of all your pain, all your problems. Doesn't matter whether it's back pain or psychological pain. What happens is these kids get started early. And they get started early on generally something like OxyContin, oxycodone, one other thing, opioids. But they're expensive if they have to get out on the street, and if mom and dad, and they've been to grandma's medicine cabinet, she doesn't have any anymore. So what do? You go out and buy very inexpensive heroin. And it's in a pure state nowadays, so you can snort heroin and still get a good high. And so they say, well, I'm snorting, I'm not shooting up. But it's the same thing. It's not good. We have had, in this last year, some multiple deaths. And I know they have down in Philadelphia and other places. Heroin has been laced with fentanyl. These people die very quickly because it's between 80 to 100% stronger than the heroin itself. Now, it's always confounded me because from a vendor point of view, why would you make the heroin so that it kills your customers? But the irony is that if you take a look at a heroin bag, a little cellophane heroin bag, most of them have a stamp on them. And the last one I think I saw was fentanyl, and it was called Wrecking Ball. And it had a little stamp of a wrecking truck. What do they call it? With the hook on the back? Mm-hmm. So here we are, and we're talking about what can we do. What can do? How can we change this? And I'm afraid that we're always asking the wrong questions, and we're getting silly answers. It doesn't matter if we're asking about gun control or heroin abuse. The question is, how can we stop heroin? You're not going to. Heroin production in Afghanistan this year was higher than it's ever been. Our borders are wide open. It's going to come through. If there's users here, there's sellers. And that's the bottom line. So the real question that we have to ask on any of these, quote unquote, from the CDC, epidemics, is why are they occurring? And then be honest enough to look at them. I'm looking at kids that come from broken homes. There is no stability in the homes. If you go over here to Harrisburg school system, the average kid has to move every 8 months. So when you say, go home and do your homework, where the hell is home? That's the kind of instability I'm talking about. I'm talking about kids that have drugs in the house, that the parents are users. I'm talking about an emptiness that has to be filled somehow, and opioids and heroin work. I remember I ran myself over with a farm tractor out of my farm, and I got into the ER. I knew the ER doc, and I said, give me morphine. And he gave me morphine. I had a bad leg. I ran over my leg and broke 2 of my ribs. And man, that was nice. So when you tell kids, well, drugs are bad. No, drugs do things. And in that case, I was happy for the morphine. But cognizant of what I do and feeling as the morphine was going up, going through my system, going from my arm through my lungs and then back into the system, and how it first then shoots up and fills the coronary arteries and goes back up the common carotid arteries into the head. I could track it. It was awesome. And that's what's the problem. It works for that person that's sick in the soul, sick in the body, that's hungry, doesn't believe that there's hope out there, doesn't think they can change, and in my perspective thinks that they're just an accident of nature, that they are not a creative being. And this gets heavy duty. It's not a creative being. If you're not creative, what the hell? That's the problem. I give speeches every year to hundreds of kids. It's called Doors, because I went through my own issues. And I tell them, and some of these kids, the last ones in were all kids that are on probation with gun violations or violent crime. And I was telling them that we've lied to them. We've lied to them big time. We've told them that they are just an accident, they're here, there is nothing other than that. You're here and that's it. Rather than saying, wow, you're created for a purpose. And once you find a purpose, it doesn't matter where you are. And I tell these kids, some of them sitting on long terms in jail, saying, I don't care if you're behind the bars. If you seek a purpose for your life and understand that you were here to learn something. Doesn't matter whether you're Hindu, Jew, Christian, just a concept that you're here for a reason. Once you get that across, then everything else changes. And actually then...
I get it in the urban areas. I mean, the hell, the lives they've had to live, not having parents, the abuse, the trauma, and all that. It's definitely understandable. What I don't get is suburbia. That one I just can't register.
Well, suburbia is a lie. Suburbia is a lie because we don't really clearly define poverty. Poverty can be both spiritual as well as financial.
True.
So you can go to some of the nicest neighborhoods here and people are living on a thread. They got it all, but they have nothing. Gibran said that luxuries move in our house as a guest and end up being master. Because now you got all the credit cards, you got the damn car payment, you have this, you have this. You're on Camus' treadmill. You know, and you're trying to make it to the top, but the rock keeps on coming down. And that's where these people are. And so
You're referring to Albert Camus?
yes.
Okay.
And the whole structure starts to fall apart. The dream is not there. The dream becomes the nightmare. So that's what we're dealing with in suburbia. We have parents that can't be parents because they're working their butts off all the time, or they're trying to look younger, or they're having an affair at the office, or whatever it is, but they can't be parents. And that goes back to your question: is have we failed our kids?
Yes.
Yes, we have.
I do believe we have.
We have.
Now, before I did my residency, I did a master's degree in public health. And one of the things that they teach you in public health school is that if you're a doctor and you see 100 kids that all drink from the same well, and 98 of them develop diarrhea, you can go ahead and write that prescription for dose after dose after dose of antibiotics, or you can walk over and say, what the hell is in this well? So I began reading everything that I could get my hands on about how exposure to adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. And then one day, my colleague walked into my office and he said, Dr. Burke, have you seen this? In his hand was a copy of a research study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. That day changed my clinical practice and ultimately my career. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is something that everybody needs to know about. It was done by Dr. Vince Felitti at Kaiser and Dr. Bob Onda at the CDC, and together they asked 17,500 adults about their history of exposure to what they called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Those include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, parental mental illness, substance dependence, incarceration, parental separation or divorce, or domestic violence. For every yes, you would get a point on your ACE score. And then what they did was they correlated these ACE scores against health outcomes. What they found was striking. Two things. Number one, ACEs are incredibly common. 67% of the population had at least one ACE, and 12.6%, 1 in 8, had 4 or more ACEs. The second thing that they found was that there was a dose-response relationship between ACEs and health outcomes. The higher your ACE score, the worse your health outcomes. For a person with an ACE score of 4 or more, their relative risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease was 2.5 times that of someone with an ACE score of 0. For hepatitis, it was also 2.5 times. For depression, it was 4.5 times. For suicidality, it was 12 times. A person with an ACE score of 7 or more had triple the lifetime risk of lung cancer and 3.5 times the risk of ischemic heart disease, the #1 killer in the United States of America. Well, of course, this makes sense. You know, some people looked at this data and they said, come on, you know, you have a rough childhood, you're more likely to drink and smoke and do all these things that are going to ruin your health. This isn't science. This is just bad behavior. It turns out this is exactly where the science comes in. We now understand, better than we ever have before, how exposure to early adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. It affects areas like the nucleus accumbens, the pleasure and reward center of the brain that is implicated in substance dependence. It inhibits the prefrontal cortex, which is necessary for impulse control and executive function, a critical area for learning. And on MRI scans, we see measurable differences in the amygdala, the brain's fear response center. So there are real neurologic reasons why folks exposed to high doses of adversity are more likely to engage in high-risk behavior. And that's important to know. But it turns out that even if you don't engage in any high-risk behavior, you're still more likely to develop heart disease or cancer. The reason for this has to do with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain's and body's stress response system that governs our fight or flight response. How does it work? Well, imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus sends a signal to your pituitary, which sends a signal to your adrenal gland that says, release stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And so your heart starts to pound, your pupils dilate, your airways open up, and you are ready to either fight that bear or run from the bear. And that is wonderful if you're in a forest and there's a bear. But the problem is what happens when the bear comes home every night. And this system is activated over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging. Children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation because their brains and bodies are just developing. High doses of adversity not only affect brain structure and function, they affect the developing immune system, developing hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. So for me, this information threw my old training out the window, because when we understand the mechanism of a disease, when we know not only which pathways are disrupted, but how, then as doctors, it is our job to use this science for prevention and treatment. That's what we do. So in San Francisco, we created the Center for Youth Wellness to prevent, screen, and heal the impacts of ACEs and toxic stress.
I want to tell you about a little girl and a massive idea. For the sake of this talk, we'll call the little girl Maya, and we'll meet her in just a moment. But the massive idea is that if we can tackle violence against children, abuse, neglect, dysfunctional parenting, we are in fact tackling some of the world's biggest public health and economic development challenges of our time. Let's meet Maya.
Sometimes someone hurts you so bad.
I don't think you understand me.
It stops hurting at all. Until something makes you feel again. And then it all comes back. Every word, every hurt. hurt. Every moment. How could you ever understand where I come from? Even if you ask, even if you listen, you do not really hear or see or feel. You don't remember my story. You haven't walked my path. You haven't seen what I've seen.
As resilient as she is, it's heartbreaking to watch, I know, but let's put our emotions aside just for one moment and imagine another scene at the same house. There is a police car parked outside with the sirens blazing. The father has been taken away by the police. The mother is incapacitated. The little boy is crying on the living room floor, and you are the social worker that has to go into that house and make an assessment of the situation of Maya. In fact, let's do that together now using something called the Adverse Childhood Experience, or ACE for short, scoring system. Are you ready? Okay. From what you saw in the clip, did you notice that Maya suffered from physical violence? Did you feel that she was humiliated? Did you think that she was unloved and uncared for? Did you think that she was neglected? Did she see her mother experience violence? Did you see alcohol or drug abuse? Okay. Other ACE questions would relate to child sex abuse, mental health, criminality in the household, or other issues. We didn't see those in the clip, but from what we could see that Maya has an ACE score of 6. And ACE scoring is at the heart of a lot of the groundbreaking research that has been done by public health pioneers such as Vincent Felitti, Robert Ander, and the inspirational Nadine Burke-Harris, which has fundamentally revolutionized the way we understand adverse childhood experience in 3 ways. Firstly, violence against children and adverse childhood experiences are much more prevalent than we ever thought they were before. 1 in 3 girls throughout the world experiences violence, and half of those never tell anybody about it. In Europe, 1 in 5 children experience child sex abuse. And here in Montenegro, violence against children is taboo and often invisible. 1 in 3 people will tell you they know a child who's been a victim of violence, either in the school or in the family. And if you translate this prevalence of adverse childhood experiences to a child population, for example, a classroom, according to researchers in Washington, it looks something like this. And you'll see, firstly, that Maya is not alone with a very high ACE score of 6, but also she's not the highest in the class because there's a boy next to her with an ACE score of 8. The second thing that we learned from all of this research was that incrementally, adverse childhood experiences are like a dose of poison in terms of lifelong well-being. The more adversity you have, the worse your life will be in childhood, through adulthood, into old age. Adults who have had adverse childhood experiences are more likely to suffer from disease, including cardiovascular or diabetes, are more likely to suffer from obesity, from addiction to Class A drugs or to alcohol, to be unemployed, to do poorly at school, to never enter college, and are more likely to end up in prison. And just to give one devastating overarching statistic, an adult with an ACE score of 7, 1 point higher than Maya, has 20 years less life expectancy than somebody with an ACE score of 0. Can you imagine the cost of that to societies all around the world? The third thing that we learned from all of this research came to us through neurobiology and is the explanation of why high ACE scores are converted into poor poor life outcomes through the study of the impact of stress upon children. And researchers identified 3 basic ways of defining stress. The first one is positive stress, and this is essential for child development. You know, it's when a child falls down and picks himself up, where a child undertakes a test in school. It's a mild elevation of the human stress response system in a child within the context of good attachment, strong family, and supportive school environment. The second type of stress, tolerable stress, is where a child may live in a very difficult situation, in a conflict zone or a high-crime urban area in, for example, the UK or the United States, but where all of the stress of that is buffeted by a strong, stable, loving family environment. The third type of stress is toxic stress, and this is where the child has continuous or repeated elevation of the human stress response system without the protection of a stable family. And often, as we saw with Maya, with the family being the cause of that stress. And toxic stress is what converts high ACE scores into poor life outcomes. But why stress? Well, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but everybody in this room has suffered some type of stress, right? You've lost your wallet, you've been attacked by an aggressive dog, or in my case, you've walked into a pub full of Chelsea supporters in your Tottenham shirt, and your whole body just moves, right? It pumps adrenaline, it goes into its own way of getting you out of that situation, and when you get to safety, you feel your body just calm down, right? You've all experienced that feeling, right? That fight or flight mode is your stress response system kicking in. And when you're in danger, when you're surrounded by Chelsea supporters, it will save your life. But if it becomes the norm, slowly, over time, it will kill you. And for children like Maya who never know when they may reach safety, it overactivates the immune system, causing lasting physiological damage. And it deactivates and impairs the part of the brain that enables learning, concentration, self-control, and the ability to calm down after a confrontation. And it activates that part of the brain that puts the child in a permanent state of fight or flight. For children with high ACE score, they are much more likely to be edgy, nervous, untrusting of adults, and to see the world as fundamentally a hostile place. And this is particularly dangerous when the child approaches adolescence. Transition to adulthood is difficult for all teenagers, and we have some teenagers in the audience today. They will tell us. And it's difficult because 2 parts of the brain that need to work in tandem are out of sync. The part of the brain that responds to incentives and provocations is fully functional by the early teens, but the cognitive control system that enables a person to manage those responses doesn't really fully develop until the early 20s. So when you see a teenager making a catastrophic decision, joining a terrorist organization or a criminal gang, or committing a violent crime, a decision that may have lasting consequences and costs for the child, for the family, and for society, it's often deeply, deeply rooted in a potent combination of high ACE scores and adolescent brain development. I know I have told you a whole load of bad news, but there is some good news as well, and that is that we have a lot of knowledge about how we can address and reduce adverse childhood experiences, and I will give you some examples of that. Firstly, we need world-class child protection systems which are fully integrated, where doctors and nurses can screen families from prenatal visits before the child is born all the way through the child life cycle, and offer support where needed, such as home visits and parental coaching, where social workers are motivated, equipped, and trained to go into a house like the one we saw in the clip and give first-class support to a child like Maya and fulfill her best interests. We need a child protection system where when children need to be taken out of the family because it's just too dangerous for them to be there, they are placed in foster, adopt, or adoptive care, preferably within the extended family, rather than the equally damaging large-scale children's homes and institutions that are so prevalent in our region and do so much damage also to children. And we need police and judges that are able to ensure the best interest of the child over and above all else, including the traditional sovereign male head of household. And we need a child protection system where all of those components work together with a shared vision of protecting children and reducing adversity in every city, in every town, in every village. We need an education system which is trauma-informed and resilience building from preschool through primary and secondary all the way to vocational and higher education. When you speak to an adult who has overcome adverse childhood experience, they will often tell you that it was a heroic teacher that got them back on track by instilling a lifelong passion for learning. But all too often, those teachers are the outliers. We need to find ways of making them the norm. We need universal preschool education for all children between the age of 3 and 6, when their brains are most active, but also most fragile. We need to have primary and secondary schools that teach characteristics such as self-control, integrity, perseverance, and optimism. Characteristics that are learnable and that benefit all children, but are really, really important for children like Maya in trying to navigate their way around a world, even when it seems that everything is stacked against them. And we also need you, because when a child like Maya reaches safety, it's often because of the intervention of a vigilant member of the public. It may sometimes seem like an ethical dilemma to poke your nose into somebody else's business and report family violence. But if you see violence against children, then if you don't report that violence, you become complicit in that violence. We need open public debate where the whole of society recognizes adverse childhood experiences and the impact they have on our society. We need democratic demand for better prevention mechanisms and response mechanisms. And we need to break the taboo on child abuse, because the taboo serves to give impunity to the abuser and little hope for the victim, such as Maya. Adverse childhood experiences, ladies and gentlemen, are a source of misery for the individual throughout the whole life cycle, but they are also a major driver of poor public health, of insecurity, and low productivity. But we now have at our fingertips the knowledge to really address this as one of the biggest public health, economic development, and human rights challenges of our time. There's a lot that needs to be done to achieve this, but we hope that you will come with us on this journey to make the invisible visible and create a world that is truly fit for children. Vala vam puno.